Matty Rimac sent a direct message to a YouTube creator that opened with the words, "Hey man, Bugatti CEO here." Not a press release, not a legal letter routed through publicists and brand managers. A direct message, written the way a person writes when something has caught their attention, in a way that official channels cannot address and that needed to be handled personally. That one detail tells you the story was never what the internet made it. Chief executives of companies inside the Volkswagen Group do not send casual DMs to YouTube creators, unless something about the situation has moved past the professional and into something more personal. And what Matt Armstrong described on the Cars and Money podcast on April 15, 2026, sitting across from Rob Moore and Carl Hartley, in a 55-minute conversation that stands as the most unfiltered account of this rebuild ever recorded, is a relationship between two men who share the same world, who have mutual friends, who both care about hypercars the way most people never care about anything, and who ended up facing each other across a dispute that neither of them created or fully controlled. Matt's exact words were that it has become like a Lionel Messi and Ronaldo situation. Not enemies, not adversaries carrying genuine animosity between them. Messi and Ronaldo. And then came the detail that reframes everything, from the VIN lock to the parts refusal to the CEO video. He said, "Those two are probably mates, mutual friends." Matt Armstrong and the CEO of Bugatti Rimac have mutual friends, and the internet, which covered the original conflict as though it were organized warfare, never once reported that part of the story. Here is what actually happened. Matt Armstrong, a YouTube creator with 6 million subscribers, purchased a crash-damaged Bugatti Chiron Pure Sport and began rebuilding it independently. The factory repair estimate had arrived at $1.7 million. He sourced parts elsewhere and documented the entire process on camera. And what the camera found inside one of the most expensive automobiles ever produced changed the conversation about hypercar maintenance in a way that cannot be walked back. A Honda Civic radiator, an Audi A3 airbag, a Porsche crash sensor, a Mercedes pyro fuse, a $20,000 service that Matt described on the podcast as consisting largely of magic tricks and parts shared with a standard Volkswagen platform. The $400,000 official repair quote was, by Matt's reading, sometimes just a formal way of saying the manufacturer does not want outside eyes on what the car contains. The brand's story around bespoke engineering and exclusive manufacture that justified the price premium sat awkwardly next to a Honda Civic Core documented on camera and uploaded for 6 million people to see. None of that information was supposed to become public, and then it was, on YouTube, permanently, available to anyone willing to spend an afternoon with a rebuild series. Bugatti Rimac responded by locking the VIN, which prevented the car from being registered and legally used on public roads. The CEO appeared in a video addressing the rebuild directly. Parts requests were refused at the official level. The internet assembled those three facts into a clean narrative about a corporation moving against a content creator who had exposed what hypercar pricing actually protects. But Matt said something on that podcast that nobody who covered the original conflict reported accurately. He believes Matty Rimac personally indicated parts could be sourced. That before the public statements and the formal corporate position hardened into place, the CEO privately suggested a solution was possible, and then the tone changed. Matt's words on the podcast were precise. He said he does think there is someone else behind Rimac's words, because the shift in tone struck him as too abrupt and too complete to have come from within. A CEO who had enough personal investment in the rebuild to message an Instagram account directly does not simply change his approach because he reconsidered his own position. Someone else, above the CEO of Bugatti Rimac. Rimac leads the company, but Bugatti Rimac is majority owned by Porsche AG, which sits inside the Volkswagen Group. Porsche AG answers in turn to a group structure, and within that structure the legal position on facilitating repairs of crash-damaged high-value vehicles is not a gray area open to executive discretion. It is a defined corporate stance, held in place by litigation history, insurance frameworks, and institutional memory that outlasts any individual CEO's tenure. Above Rimac, there are shareholders, board members, and legal teams who approach the question of a crash-damaged vehicle rebuild entirely differently to the way an engineer approaches it. The liability question at that level is not about structural integrity or whether a skilled rebuild can produce a road-safe automobile. It is about what appears in a courtroom filing if a manufacturer is shown to have facilitated a repair on a crash-damaged vehicle that subsequently causes an incident. And legal teams at that scale answer that question the same way every time. Matt's theory is that Rimac personally saw a path forward, that the CEO who messaged an Instagram account directly, who produced a video response that Matt described as absolutely mental for a chief executive to make, who chose Messi and Ronaldo as his comparison when describing a YouTube creator he was ostensibly in conflict with, may have genuinely wanted to find a workable arrangement. And then someone positioned above him in the corporate structure said no, and Rimac, caught between his own engineering instincts and the institutional position of the organization he answers to, had to change his public tone to match the instruction handed down from above. That is not a contradiction of his earlier position. That is the reality of leading a company inside one of the largest automotive conglomerates in the world, where personal judgment and board-level authority are rarely the same thing, and where the person with the most relevant expertise is rarely the person with the final say. Every observable fact about how this situation unfolded supports that reading. Rimac's early communication registered as practical, direct, and personal in its approach. His later communication was formal, distant, and legally aligned. That shift does not come from a person reconsidering their own view. It comes from the person with the relevant expertise, and the active human relationship being overridden by the person who holds the final authority. And that person, sitting at board level inside a major Volkswagen-owned subsidiary, has not watched a YouTube rebuild series and does not intend to begin. That is not a criticism of the board position. Large organizations protecting themselves from liability exposure are not the same thing as a person choosing to obstruct a rebuild. What makes the Messi and Ronaldo comparison precise, rather than merely diplomatic, is that Rimac reached for it independently. The CEO of Bugatti, when asked to characterize his relationship with the YouTube creator who had been publicly documenting the gap between hypercar pricing and hypercar contents, did not reach for language about brand protection or liability exposure. He reached for the greatest rivalry in the history of football. And that choice reveals more about how Rimac privately views Matt Armstrong than any statement produced by a communications team ever could. Rimac did not reach for that comparison because a consultant suggested it. He reached for it because it is the one that most accurately describes the dynamic from his own private perspective. And that private perspective matters when you are trying to understand what this story is actually about beneath the corporate statements. You use that comparison when you respect someone, when you see them working at a level that commands that kind of reference. When the honest private acknowledgement is that whatever the public situation looks like, this person is genuinely exceptional at what they do. Messi and Ronaldo, for anyone who followed football through the years they occupied opposite ends of the same argument, do not carry genuine animosity toward each other. Multiple interviews across their careers confirmed they communicated, respected each other's contribution to the game, and understood what the other had built. The rivalry that a sport used to define a generation was amplified by supporters and media into something considerably more hostile than the actual reality between the two men. Matt said the same dynamic applied between him and Rimac, and then Rimac confirmed it by reaching for the same comparison independently from his own side of the story. Both men arrived at the same metaphor without coordination, which is itself a form of acknowledgement. The build produced something that no part of the conflict can undo. 14 months of independent documentation on the most complex car Bugatti has placed into production, a Chiron Pure Sport, stripped, cataloged, and rebuilt on camera, with every shared component identified and every repair cost measured against what the factory would have charged. That information does not become private again. Matt had not needed Bugatti's cooperation to arrive at that outcome. The Chiron started. The first drive happened. The rebuild proved the point that the parts refusal, the VIN lock, and the CEO video were supposed to prevent anyone from making, which is that a crash Bugatti is not a total loss if you are prepared to do the work. The BCM reset is complete, the color reveal is close, and the moment a number plate goes on this car and it moves onto a public road, everything that happened between Matt and Rimac gets read from that ending backward. The VIN lock did not stop it. The CEO video did not stop it. And Rimac, who watched it all develop from inside the corporate structure that made those decisions, watched it not stop it either. The story the internet told was a manufacturer against a creator. What Matt described on April 15th is two people genuinely into the same things, moving in overlapping circles with shared contacts, both constrained by forces that existed well above their individual decisions, and producing between them the most detailed, independent documentation of a Bugatti Chiron Pure Sport that has ever been made available to the public. Neither of them designed that outcome, both of them built it. And somewhere between Rimac's opening DM and the footage of that engine running for the first time, the real story of this rebuild sits, far more human than what spread across the internet, and far more worth understanding.